So today I'm going to try and focus on positive mental health. Just press down. Okay. Yeah. But what are we talking about when we say positive mental health? Most people, when asked this question, give one of these responses that I should be happy, I should have a feeling of well-being, I should feel satisfied, I should feel positive, I should find meaning in life, and I should achieve my full personal potential. So these are the things that people say when asked about positive mental health. But why is it important in the first place? There is quite a lot of research now that shows that what is called mind-body medicine. In fact, many of you may be interested to know that in Harvard now, all medical residents are expected to go through a mind-body medicine course as a mandatory requirement. This is a recent phenomena. Dr. Satbir Singh Khalsa, who is he's a psychologist, but he is in the faculty of medicine there, shared when he came to NIMHANS last time. It's very interesting that they have already taken this step, and we are here, dilly-dallying about whether there is anything called as mind-body medicine. The Indian Psychiatric Society, of course, has now constituted a task force of which I am co-chairperson also. So we know that the mental state has a major effect on physical health and immunity, very important in these times of COVID, and even vice versa. If you are physically not well, of course, mentally feeling well is very difficult. And as you see by these quotes, it's all depends on this is a very old quote from Epictetus, which says, we don't really see things as they are, but rather as we understand them. So it's a very important statement. And next comes the question of who can achieve. Is it a child? Is it an adult, a senior citizen? There are pluses and minuses for each of these age groups. Children are born with a sense of joy. Unfortunately, as age goes by, it seems to decrease, and we lose that ability to be joyful about things no matter what the circumstance as an adult. I'm sure many of you would have watched the movie called Life is Beautiful, where a father tries to show that war is a game to his child to protect the child from the baleful influence of war. But children have an innate ability. Adults seem to have forgotten, and some people say it comes back in senior age when you have less responsibility, but again, a lot of negatives in elderly population also. Actually, the answer should be all of the above, like an MCQ. Similarly here, where do you find the positive mental health? At home? You would expect so, but it doesn't really happen that way. In the school, in the college, in the office, in sports field or creative professions, which many people think is the best way to achieve positive mental health. Or of course, there are other people who would rather go to a bar or a restaurant to achieve this. Again, the answer should be all the above, provided we know how. So the answer can only be all the above if we know how to do it. And for this, I would like you to direct you to the work of, now these are just a reminder slide that what we are talking about, what positive mental health in this context is. I would like you to direct to the work of a person who is as famous as for his work as for his unpronounceable surname. His surname is spelled, if I am right, Csikszentmihalyi, although it doesn't read like that. So he is an immigrant to the United States during the World War II, and he's a professor of psychology. He's of course now very old, close to the, I think, late 80s, if I am right. But his work is very important. He was the primary person who has been stressing on positive mental health since the 1980s, and he has done a tremendous amount of work in what he calls as the flow experience, or the optimal experience that people can go through. And he says that this is a state where you forget yourself. There is, in the yogic tradition, we talk about dharana and dhyana. So dharana is when you and the object are there, and dhyana is when you and the object merge and there is only oneness. So this is something like that. So where people are so involved in an activity that nothing else matters. This is very commonly described in sports, and music activities where the person is said to be in his zone or in the groove. And these are different descriptions, but the important thing is the motivation is intrinsic. I am not doing it for money or fame. I am just doing it because I want to do it. That is what he calls as flow. And there is a merging of action and awareness. But very importantly for this, there has to be a matching of skill, the person's skill and the challenge that he is facing. So that is what is important according to Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi C. And where would we expect this? Of course, you would expect it in sports and creative arts, which is the most common response that people give. But surprisingly, the third highest occurrence of this state apparently is at work, which is surprising. But then, if you really look into the thing, we spend most of our waking life working. So even if we cannot find it there, then life would be very difficult. And he himself, in his book, which is a wonderful book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, he says, he has written a chapter where half the chapter is on yoga. He says yoga is one of the oldest and most systematic methods of producing this called as the flow experience. So to give you examples, of course, I am a fan of Roger Federer and Tendulkar, so I have given, and Lata Mangeshkar, of course, is a national icon for all of us. But the person in the fourth with myself and Dr. Gangadhar is well known, again, Nobel Prize winner for peace, Dalai Lama. He is one person I would really say that he has seems to have achieved this, what we would in the yogic tradition called as samatva. We had the privilege of meeting and spending 45 minutes with him at Bailakuppe to invite him to Nimans, and of course he did come to Nimans also, as most of the Nimans people know. He is a wonderful example of this ability to remain unruffled and talk to each person as though it is what he has come to talk to you is as important to the Dalai Lama as to the person who has come. It's an incredible capacity that this man has. He sees up to 150 to 200 people a day, he meets them, and each person he is able to immediately shift to what they want to talk. It's a very difficult thing to do, let me tell you. And for 40 minutes, he held us spellbound talking about your meditation and yoga, and he made very incisive comments which have driven us to sort of look into the meditation, which we were not really looking into. It's a wonderful example of a childlike innocence coupled with wisdom. He seems to be in the flow state almost all the time. And here Mihaly describes two terms which are very important to distinguish. One, he says, is pleasure. Okay, I am hungry, I eat food, I am satisfied. So physiological, that is pleasure. But he says enjoyment is not that. Enjoyment is when you have skill and you try to meet a challenge which is you are able to do. He says that is enjoyment, and this is what leads to change and growth. Pleasure just leads to contentment. Okay, 6 hours later, I am again hungry, I have to eat again. Whereas enjoyment leads to change in the person. So this is what we are talking about when we want to achieve positive mental health. But how do we do that? You have to train your body and the brain, because if you want it to sustain, yeah, there are ways of achieving it temporarily using drugs, or, some people say alcohol makes them do it, but none of them can be sustained, as you know. How to achieve a sustained positive mental state? The only way is training your body and, more importantly, your brain. As you can see with examples of people we have put here, starting with Yogacharya B.K. Iyengar on the left side, who, as you all know, was a very sick boy. His health was very poor in his childhood, and he took up yoga as a means of remedying this and went on to become one of the greatest yoga gurus the world has seen. His life is a standing example of how you can train your body. And training your mind, Abdul Kalam is a very good example, who has risen from a very small place in Rameshwaram to become a space scientist and the President of India, a very great man who has trained himself to be like that. You can't simply say it is just genetics, it is training. The other third person I'd like to comment is a person from our own city, Rahul Dravid, who trained himself not only to be an extraordinary cricketer, but a gentleman, which is very rare in such kind of atmosphere, is a competitive atmosphere. So as this book on him says, the nice guy who finished first. It's a rarity. Nice guys usually are supposed to finish last. So these are people who have trained themselves, to achieve that state. And how do you do that? When I was a medical student, we were taught that the brain is not a very plastic organ, in the sense that if there is a damage to a part of the brain, uh, nothing much can be done about it, because you can't go in and change something in the brain. But now we know that it is not true, and the brain is an incredibly plastic organ, at least functionally, if not structurally. V.S. Ramachandran's book, The Phantom Limb, is a very interesting read, because it makes the point that if something is not there, how the brain can map its function to another part of the brain. It's also very important to distinguish the working of a human brain to a computer. Many people think they are very similar, but actually, definitely, at this point of time, no computer, even deep thought, I don't think has anywhere come near the capacity of the human brain, simply because in the human brain, it is possible to change things functionally and even structurally, as I will go on to show, which a computer cannot. You can, of course, go and if there is a short circuit, you can replace it, but the brain itself doing it simply cannot happen. Maybe artificial intelligence, it will come in a few years, that it can decide that something is not working and change it. But right now, it cannot happen. So this is a very important fact for us to know. And what we talk about neuroplasticity, it's a big word now, and it's, everybody talks about neuroplasticity, but what are we actually saying? Donald Holding-Hebb, who was the father of neuropsychology, gave this in his book Organization of Behavior in 1949. He says neurons that fire together, wire together, and neurons that out of sync lose their link. This is known as Hebb's law in neurology, and this is actually the basis of our ability to rewire our brains. Say, for example, let me give you the example of memory. Now, there are implicit and explicit memory. Implicit memory is, for example, riding a bicycle or swimming, which once we learn, we don't forget. Simply because the circuit involved is very strong and it is imprinted on that circuit. Whereas other names of people, other things, semantic memory is a little more difficult. We don't train ourselves that much. But if you do, you would have seen this so-called memory experts or training experts who can remember 40 words up and down, and from the other order. They have simply trained themselves to do it, right? So this is very important to realize, that we can actually train our brain. How do you do that? The golden rule is practice makes perfect. Some people describe what is called as the 10,000 hour rule, which is basically saying that if you do something 10,000 for 10,000 hours, you have made that circuit so strong that it becomes almost automatic. Say, for example, your pilots of the aeroplanes, they all talk about flying hours. Why do they give so much importance to flying hours? Simply because you have done it again and again and again. And in a crisis, you would automatically do what is required. So neurosurgeons, for example, experience is the most important thing for a neurosurgeon, simply because of it becomes automatic for that person to do the right thing when there is a crisis. Daniel Kahneman, who is a Nobel Prize winner in economics, talks about two systems in the human brain. Our response is system 1 and system 2. So system 1 is a instinctive response, which is life-saving. Say, for example, I'm falling down, I stretch out my hand so that I break the fall. That's system 1, which is working. System 2 is something that takes time. You analyze information and then you respond. Unfortunately, most of us use system 1 because it is easy. We tend to use it for almost everything. Somebody says something, I immediately become angry. It's an instinctive response. I have not thought about what it means. Why is the person saying this? We tend to use system 1. It becomes, and if you keep doing that, you are simply strengthening that system, and you're not giving a chance to system 2, which is really the analytical part of the brain. That's what he talks about. So how do we get to the state where we try to use system 2 is what is talked about as mindfulness. You see something or you hear something, you don't react to it. You observe it, but you don't react. It's very easy to say, but it's difficult to do. But only by doing that, you can allow system 2 to get into the picture. Otherwise, most of our responses are system 1. Of course, it's important for life-saving things, but in a response to a social world, system 1 most of the time hasn't thought out its response and therefore may be hurtful or even wrong. So now comes the question of, is what we talk about neurogenesis, new neurons or new connections, is it possible in adults? Yes. There is a lot of research showing that it is possible, but not everywhere. Especially in the olfactory bulb and the hippocampus, and all of us know that the area in blue here is called the hippocampus, which is critical for memory in the human brain. It is possible to develop new neurons in the hippocampus even in adulthood and even in people at the age of 60. So this is something that is remarkable and is very encouraging for all of us, especially if you are on the wrong side of 40. So how do we do all this? We want a positive mental state. We want to have as many active neurons as possible. Yoga, of course, many people ask me, they write yoga and meditation, which is, something like saying physics without mathematics. It's not very sensible, because yoga definitely includes meditation. Intermittent fasting is something that has been shown to increase the chance of neurogenesis and having positive mental health, having positive physical health also, having novel experiences, learning a new skill, and reading. Reading, I would say that it has to be something that makes you forget yourself. Whether it is Harry Potter or you like science fiction, you have to be able to forget yourself and go into whatever the book you are reading. That kind of experience helps you generate positive mental state. Now, in today's, I'm going to focus on yoga. So I'm going to talk about where yoga came from. Of course, we all know that yoga is part of the Shad Darshanas, or the 6 Darshanas of traditional Indian thought or philosophy, if you want to call it that way. And Patanjali is considered as the person who codified. It's not that he invented yoga, but he codified it in a understandable way for us to follow. Now, what is his definition? Of course, his definition is yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which is controlling the oscillations of the mind. According to him, is yoga. The oldest definition is, of course, comes from Yoga Vasishta, which also talks about a intervention to calm down the mind. And the Gita, Krishna's discourse to Arjuna, talks about Samatvam Yoga Vichyate, which I will explain. But all of this, please notice, talk about the mind, not about the body. Yoga is a physical exercise, is a recent invention by predominantly the Western world, and some people, of course, who think the only yoga is Hatha Yoga. But it is not. If you look at even Patanjali Yoga Sutra, if you read it, it consists of 196 verses, not a single named asana in the whole book. All of it talks about what is yoga and how it will control the mind. So this is an important thing I would like to draw your attention to. I'm sure many of you would have seen this Rudyard Kipling's famous poem called If, which came out in 1910, where he says, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same. You can see that 12 centuries ago, or rather, so we have already said this in the Gita, that Yogastha Kuru Karmani Sangham Tyaktva Dhananjaya. So if you renounce your attachment and do your karma or your work, if you can be even-minded, Siddhi Asiddhyo Samo Bhutva, if you can treat both to the same, this is yoga. Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. So luckily for us, Professor Govinda Swami, who was the first director of NIMHANS, was also a noted Sanskrit scholar, and he has put this in the NIMHANS logo. We haven't put it now. It has been there since that time, and he felt it was very important for mental health and neurosciences. So all of us know the Ashtanga Yoga with Patanjali codified, and unfortunately most people have forgotten the first two and not even gone into the last four. Everybody is focused on asana and pranayama, but according to Patanjali, these are limbs, all of which need to be experienced if one has to go to the final stages. The first five stages, of course, yama, niyama, which are the rules, do's and don'ts, if you want to call it that way. Asana, which is ability of keeping the body in different postures comfortably and for a period of time. Pranama, the science of breath regulation. And Pratyahara, which is dissociation or withdrawing from the sensual world. These five are called as Bahiranga Yoga. The last three, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi, are called as the Antaranga Yoga, which is the inward looking practices. Like I said, it is almost like a sequential way, but not necessarily you do one thing after the other. You can do it simultaneously, but all of it has to be done if you have to reach the stage of what is called as Samadhi or the realization. This is the Patanjali's concept of Ashtanga Yoga. And many people ask this question. Myself and Dr. Ramjem have written a paper on yoga and physical exercise. What are the similarities and the differences? And in fact, there are very, very important differences. In many physiological aspects, yoga is the opposite of physical exercise, in the sense that you do things more efficiently, not necessarily faster or using more oxygen. In fact, oxygen requirement in many yogasanas decreases. This is a slide which is a repetition for people who have heard me before. I put it in all my talks on yoga just to show that how something is done is as important as what is done. So the posture seems very similar, but the effects are likely to be exactly opposite the next day morning. So you can look at what you want from yoga. Why should we do yoga? Okay, you want a flat stomach. Okay, maybe yoga will give you a flat stomach, but then is that all you're looking for from yoga? Then fine, Hatha Yoga is good enough. But if you're looking for the effects that Patanjali and other masters have described, you need to look at yoga slightly differently. There is enough and more evidence now from healthy people. Today, like I said, I'm going to talk mostly about people like you and me, assuming all of us are psychiatrically healthy here. What can yoga give us if we do it the way it is supposed to be done, which is mindfully? As I said in the article that we published, the most important difference between yoga and exercise is amount of mindfulness. So when I'm doing in the gym cardio, I'm not really thinking about what is my leg doing, what is my hand doing, what is my position. I'm thinking of, can I meet 120 beats per minute? Can I run as fast as 6 kilometers per minute? That's what we are looking at. But what we are not looking at is what is the position of our body, how am I breathing, how many breaths. That is exactly what is important in yoga. That is called as mindfulness. So it is shown beyond doubt now that people who do yoga or meditation over the long term have less brain atrophy than all of us who don't do that. What about mental illness? Now meta-analyses are there which show that the effect size in favor of yoga is a very respectable figure, that if you do yoga, most mental illnesses, there is a salutary effect of the yoga. So what we have been doing at NIMHANS, of course, the research work has been going on for the last almost 5 decades. Initially, of course, in the departments of neurophysiology and clinical psychology. Later in the new millennium, psychiatry has been doing quite a bit of work on yoga. And we have had collaborations with the Art of Living Foundation, the Svyasa Yoga University in Bangalore, and the Morarji Desai National Institute of Yoga in New Delhi. And in 2014, the institute took the momentous decision of establishing a center for clinical therapy of yoga for patients with psychiatric and neurological disorders. Till then, it was purely research. And 2019, this has actually reached fruition. In that sense, it has become a completely separate department of integrative medicine, the first such department in any national institute in India. What have we found? I'm just going to summarize in one slide. We have found that yoga can produce significant clinical effects in terms of symptoms and cognition in depression, in a serious disorder which we call as schizophrenia, cognitive impairment in healthy elderly, alcohol dependence, and of course OCD, ADHD, other psychiatric disorders as well. But more importantly, we have also found biological correlates which may suggest the mechanism by which yoga is doing these things. Not just saying that yoga works, but how it works. For example, I would go on to talk about depression later. This is a very interesting study for all of us, like I said, who are on the wrong side of 40. What does yoga, say 6 months yoga do in the elderly? This was a PhD thesis in the department of, now what is Department of Integrative Medicine, at that time under psychiatry. We taught yoga for 6 months to people residing in old age homes in Bangalore. And what we found that there was a significant improvement in memory at the end of 6 months in these people, which led to a improvement in their quality of life. They had less difficulties with sleep. And of course, this makes a major difference in an elderly person. So how does yoga do these things? One learns yoga from a teacher. We imitate the teacher. This is a very, very important mechanism because there are a set of neurons in the brain called as the mirror neurons, which are specialized at learning from imitation. Then we perform this with mindfulness. We synchronize the breath with the movement. But most importantly, we remain physically relaxed except the posture. This is very important. And then we focus on the experience and breathing. So what happens? This is an example from depression. It is a marker of neuroplasticity called the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which is a very important molecule. The level of this molecule in the brain and in the blood, which is also an indicator, shows how healthy our brain is and able to repair itself from minor damages. It is well known that in depression, the BDNF levels are low, and it improves whenever any treatment is given, like antidepressants, especially electroconvulsive therapy is the single most potent inducer of BDNF. And we were able to show that even yoga does the same. So it might be that the mechanisms of action of yoga are not so much dissimilar from other therapies. So this distinction between biological therapies and psychological therapies might be just ignorance. There has been a study of cognitive behavior therapy in OCD showing that it produced changes in the brain. So it might just be a distinction that is our ignorance. We don't know that even psychological therapies produce biological effects. And yoga, has both components of biological and psychological. This is a very interesting study. Of course, it's a very small study, so we have to replicate it, which we are currently in the process of trying to do. But very interestingly, 6 months of yoga in elderly people was able to increase the size of the brain area called as hippocampus. This is an amazing finding if it can be replicated, and which shows that even, mind you, these are all people who are above 65 or 60 years of age. And if their brain can change structurally, what more do you want? Another example I'd like to give, Om, which unfortunately many times it has been seen that we need somebody from the Western science or philosophy to come and remind us what is there in the Indian tradition. Sir John Woodruff was such a person who said the mantra Om is an example of saying a great deal in a few words. So what happens when we chant Om? We did a very small pilot study in people just like you and me, healthy people. And what we found is surprisingly that it does not lead to increase in brain blood flow to an area, but rather it decreases brain blood flow to an area called as the limbic system in the brain, which is a seat of strong emotion. This is a very primitive area of the brain we share with even reptiles. And most of the negative emotions, anger, lust, hate, greed, all when this area becomes activated, we experience many of these emotions. So what Om chanting seemed to do was reduce blood flow to these regions, which may affect which may explain the calming effect of this practice. This is a very recent thing that we have done, very interesting. If you look at the Mandukya Upanishad, which is said to be one of the smallest, I think it is the smallest if I am right, but it is said to be almost like a summary of all the Upanishads. It talks about this A, U, Ma. As you know, Om can be said Om, or you can be said A, U, Ma, which combines into Om. The yogic tradition emphasizes this way of saying Om. And mind you, it is not only this component is the most important, because there is a vibratory sensation that we feel. This can happen even if you say Amen, you say Amin. The is the important part. So when you stress that part, what seems to happen is that through the vagal nerve, there is a parasympathetic stimulation through the vagal nerve, and this seems to bring down the domination of the sympathetic system that happens in states when we are the fight-flight reaction, or when we are anxious, when we are angry. The sympathetic system becomes too dominant. The parasympathetic system, which brings back calm, has to be stimulated to bring back the balance. And this Om, or there is a yogic practice called as Brahmari, which is the humming of a bee. Or if you want to do it. This kind of practice seems to produce this kind of change. And interestingly, in the Mandukya Upanishad, it talks about what is A, U, Ma. It says the sound A reflects the waking or the gross state of the human mind. U is the dreaming or the subtle, is the bridge between the waking state and the deep sleep. And the is the deep sleep state. Silence after this, according to the Mandukya Upanishad, is the true self. And we thought we will do a fMRI experiment to see whether we can show any connection. So just to explain, this of course is a credit of Dr. Bharat Holla and Dr. Hemant Bhargav, who are faculty in the Department of Integrative Medicine. We can think in modern terms that A represents the executive and the explicit part of the mind. The U and the Ma represent the implicit mind, where salience is the system 2, which Daniel Kahneman talks about, is evaluating the salience of a particular stimulus. Right? So that is U and Ma, and the silence is what we now call as the Turiya state in yoga, or default mode in the modern terminology. So what we did is that we tried to look at the functional scan of the human brain when people are experienced meditator is saying, in this case, Hemant Bhargav himself, who is a assistant professor of yoga, when he was inside the gantry and saying these syllables, what happens in the brain. So here the red parts reflect the active states, and the blue represents the restful the parts of the brain which are not active during that time. You please observe what happens between A and U. As you can see, the red parts become less and less, and if you go to it's very difficult to find something that is really active. So this seems to reflect what the Mandukya Upanishad is talking about, that we go from the executive waking state to the bridge state and then to the resting state. So this is so if you can subtract which are the areas, say you subtract from the A and see what happens. As you can see, lot of the brain areas which are active during the A syllable become inactive during the Similarly, there is slight difference between A and U. So we feel that this is an ongoing process. When you are saying Om, you go from the active waking state to the subtle state and then into a very restful state which represents. So as you can see, there is again a difference between U and So very interestingly, we are trying to replicate this in large number of people. This was done on a single subject. So if we can show this, this will give us a direct link to what the Mandukya Upanishad is talking about. I'm coming to the end of my presentation, but I would like to leave you with some of these things that, this is not only in healthy people. This is an example of patients with schizophrenia, where we can, if you observe that part before yoga and then what happens after yoga, it should change now. Slide wise is not changing. It's not changing. No? If I click, will it change? So I wanted to show you the difference between before yoga and after yoga. Somehow it doesn't seem to be working. If I put this, what will happen? It's animation. So next, I think it will go to the next slide. Yeah, now it's happening if I make it full screen. So as you can see, there is a increased network coherence within the thing, looking at the voxels before and after yoga. This is in patients with schizophrenia, which I said is a very severe mental illness. Even in these people, yoga can produce changes in the brain network coherence. And I would like to give you another example, not just imaging. We all know that there is a neurotransmitter called as the gamma aminobutyric acid, or the GABA, which is a inhibitory, the most important inhibitory neurotransmitter in the human brain. And Chris Streeter in her study showed that with the yoga, brain GABA increases through magnetic resonance spectroscopy. We used TMS, magnetic stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, to look at what we call as the cortical silent period, which again is a marker of the ability to inhibit impulses in the brain. And we were able to show that experienced yoga practitioners have a significantly longer cortical silence period. What it means is that when you give a stimulus, after that there is silence for a long period of time. This reflects the ability to damp down or control the impulses. And people who practice yoga seem to have a better ability to do that. We did a prospective study also in after 20 sessions, before and after 20 sessions. And again, we were able to show that this ability of inhibiting your brain improved in people who did yoga. This is a single person's example before and after yoga. As you can see, this increased from 51.95 to 106 milliseconds, almost more than double actually, within, I think this was after 1 month, isn't it? 20 sessions. So 20 sessions over 1 month of practice. Very interestingly, again in depression, this ability seems to be reduced. So here, if you see the left of the slide, people with depression have a very low cortical silent period. People who practiced walking for some time, small change, not a very significant change. But people who did yoga, in the blue disc, you can see that it improved significantly, although it had not reached the level of normal people. Mind you, this is only after, I think, 5 sessions of yoga. So we were able to show that it is impaired in depression, and with yoga, just like the VDNF, this also improves. Okay. Why is it important in the times of Corona? People are talking about AC and VC now, before and after Corona. This is again an example of a prayer that has become extremely famous. Reinhold Niebuhr's what is called as the Serenity Prayer, that gives us the courage to change what must be altered, serenity to accept what cannot be helped. In all the convent schools, this is very often taught to children, and more importantly, the insight to know one from the other. But if you look back at one of the greatest universities of ancient India, Nalanda University, perhaps one of the greatest in the world, Shantideva has said in the 8th century itself, if there is a remedy when trouble strikes, why should you be dejected? And if there is no remedy, why should you be upset about it? You accept it as it comes. Now, this is very important. But how do we do this? How do we bring our brains to this level? You have to do some of the things that we discussed. So in dealing with crisis, the most useful advice is accept that we cannot control everything. Focus on what you can control. If you want to make a list of what we can do, and then we set short-term goals or targets. You cannot build a 3rd floor without the foundation being laid. So to summarize, I would say positive mental health is a matter of training and strengthening of selected brain networks. The brain, fortunately for all of us, is an excellent trainee. Neuroplasticity is possible in each one of us, no matter what age or what status we are in. But we need to generate enjoyment and flow experiences, or have optimal experiences, which will lead to change and growth. As Csikszentmihalyi says, yoga is one of the most systematic methods of training the body and the brain. The equal of yoga, he has said, this is not my words, he said, the equivalent of yoga has not been produced in Western philosophy till now. There are some equivalents in other ancient traditions, like Chinese and Japan, but in the Western tradition, there is nothing equivalent to yoga. There are other ways of doing it. If you are very much against yoga, it's not that everybody should do yoga only. You can, try intermittent fasting. You have a variety of new experiences. For example, many old people I see nowadays have taken to this Sudoku, this number kind of a game. And apparently it can produce a lot of new connections in the brain. There is some research by a professor from Japan on number skills, learning new skills even in adulthood or even elderly, reading interesting things. But very importantly, you have to challenge yourself and you have to enjoy that challenge, for which the motivation has to be intrinsic. It's not just for the sake of working. I come to work because I have to get a salary. You're unlikely to learn much. If you enjoy your work, you're likely to grow. And very importantly, in the context of crisis, focus on yourself and what you can control. Please don't misunderstand that whatever I have shown in Niman's work has been done by me. It's definitely not the case. It is a big team here from many departments which are working on yoga. And I would like to thank all our within the institute and outside, our collaborators, the Art of Living, the Vyasa Yoga University, the Moraji Desai Institute of Yoga, the Ayush department, actually it's a ministry now, and of course our own team, including Dr. Gangadhar, who has been the pioneer for work in the Department of Psychiatry at Nimans. Thank you very much. My email is there. People who are not able to generate questions right now can also ask. I have a list of questions here. Okay. The first one I think is Ram James department. How to test cortical silence? Yeah. TMS is one of the ways to do it, transcranial magnetic stimulation. So this is basically, you give a magnetic stimulation to the brain and then record what happens. You can test cortical silence. That's one of the good ways. Any other ways, Ram? As of now, we don't really know now. EEG also you can do it. So FNARS is something that is coming up, functional near-red infrared spectroscopy. But right now TMS is the best way to do it. So what all yoga can be done for mental health? I mean, this is a question that I'm not really competent to answer. I'm not a yogi, in spite of many people who think that I'm a psychiatrist. But of course, we have a set of practices which we think that will help. We are, of course, running a yoga module online for people who want to log in. Please go to nimansyoga.in. This is the website, nimhansyoga.in. You will find a link to a YouTube video as well as the link to join online yoga sessions. We are running it primarily in the context of the COVID crisis for people who are stressed. So this includes many of this, but to put it in a very simple manner, I would say the most important is you can do any of the yogasanas with a lot of mindfulness. Do it slowly, do it with understanding, do it with breath regulation. All of them are good for mental health. Some of them should not be done. Yes, there are some things for particular conditions. If you have epilepsy, something should not be done, say Kapalbhati, not a good idea. If you have low back pain, forward bending is not a good idea. But on the whole, if you ask the Iyengar school people, they would say asana itself can be meditative. As I heard Sadhguru say in a recent talk, he said, please don't talk about meditation as though it is only sitting in a place and closing your eyes and listening to some music, and that is just one aspect. You have to become meditative in everything. I eat meditatively, I talk meditatively, that has to be the target. So if you do any of the yogasanas in that way, definitely will have fantastic effects for your mental health. What all parameters that can be used to measure positive mental health? This I would really recommend you to read the book Flow by Csikszentmihalyi. There are two books he has written. One is very theoretical, which is called The Foundation of Positive Psychology. If you are a serious researcher in positive mental health, that is the book that you need to read. He has described his experiments, what are the tools he has used, and how he has done his work, it would give you a very good idea to do work. What is this? Why yoga is not prescribed with medicines? What do you mean? I don't know. Okay, if I understand it right, you say why more people are not prescribing yoga. I think that's the essence. It's simply because the awareness that yoga, what is yoga, is different in different people. People talk about yoga as though it's a cardio. You can say, what is that yoga? Hot yoga. You can say power yoga. There are people who say beer yoga, which people do yoga by keeping a beer bottle and balancing. There are people who do doga, it seems, doing yoga with your dog. I mean, people have taken yoga into whatever they want to project, but essentially, the real understanding of what yoga is very limited. That's the reason why many of us are doing this kind of sessions. I'm sure there are so many people who may not talk about it, but they have understood yoga in a better way than us. But it definitely can work wonders. In fact, most research has shown that if you combine what is called a conventional method like allopathy medicine with a complementary, what is unfortunately called as complementary and alternative medicine, which is Ayurveda or yoga, you get better results than either alone. So they seem to be somewhat synergistic rather than anti, provided the practitioner knows what he is doing, right? So for example, if somebody asks me, can I take this Ayurveda medicine along with your medicine? Unless I know a bit of Ayurveda, it's difficult for me. Similarly, yoga, that is the problem. The people who should be prescribing may not know the yoga, and people who teach the yoga, many of them are not medical professionals. This is why we have to link hands between these two professions. The last one, I think, is question I have here is mechanism of intermittent fasting. Yeah, that's a very interesting thing. There is a lot of recent literature, especially from Singapore and other places, which shows that intermittent fasting produces significant physical and mental benefits in terms of cognition, in terms of fat percentage, in terms of, preventing onset of diabetes. But the mental part of it seems to be that it gives the chance for the brain to take a rest. Because if you, in the Kannada, I don't know how many of you understand Kannada, there is a saying that Dinakomme undavanu yogi, Dinakke eradu bari undavanu bhogi, ಮೂರು ಬಾರಿ ಉಂಡವನು ರೋಗಿ, and ನಾಲ್ಕು ಬಾರಿ ಉಂಡವನು ಎತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಿ. Which says basically, if you eat once a day, you are a yogi. If you eat twice, you are a normal bhogi or somebody that enjoys something. If you eat 3 times a day, you are a patient. Yogi is patient. And if you eat 4 times, better to take you away to the cemetery. So this reflects the understanding that the body, if you give it food many times a day, the whole mechanism has to be about digestion. Now, where does the brain get? The only sleeping time becomes the time. And even then the problem is we eat now and sleep half an hour later. That's a terrible thing to do, simply because how will your food get digested? Now, the brain has other things to do during sleep. As the neurophysiology people will tell you, sleep is a very, very important thing for the human brain to do many things which cannot do during the waking state. Why? Because it has to do coordination, it has to focus on digestion, it has to focus on other responses. So intermittent fasting, in my opinion, this is my opinion, is that it gives the brain a break. And in this break, then it is able to do a lot of what is called as the rejuvenatory practices. The Ayurveda has a very strong emphasis on rejuvenation. There is a branch of Ayurveda called as Rasayana Shastra, which is all about rejuvenation, not repair. So repair is what we do. I get ill, I go to take a medicine, that is just repair. But what about rejuvenation? Where is the time for rejuvenation? In this busy life, there is simply no time. We eat all the time, we move about all the time. So if you don't eat, so intermittent fasting, basically there are many ways to do it. the most replicated way has been the what is called as the 16 to 8. So that means you eat all your meals in 8 hours. And 16 hours you have to give a gap. It sounds very difficult to do, but it's not very difficult actually. Many of us have done it, and it's not very difficult, provided you eat properly in that 8 hours. If you starve yourself through the day, then of course it becomes very difficult. The other way has been also shown without that much evidence is that once a week, 24-hour fast, which many of our ajis used to do, our grandmothers, for religious reasons. So religion, in my view, has been an excuse to get people to do this kind of things. That's my reading of it in the olden days, because people don't listen to reason. People listen to either superstition or fear or something that comes that it is religious, then people do it without question. Why should now when Corona, we are talking about 14 days quarantine, wash your hands, we don't eat without washing. This is all what used to be called as madi. In the Indian tradition, you don't eat without washing your foot and your hands. Why it came? At that time, plague and these things would have been very common. So it has been couched in the word language of religion to make people obey it without question. Because you can't go on educating every single fellow and every person will ask any question and not do it. So this is my understanding, but it's very important to understand that all these practices have been done before. If you look at the Jains, they don't eat after 6 o'clock. So they say that it is to, correlate with the sun's activity. So the biggest meal, even the Ayurveda says, Anna Kalam Dve, which means eating is only 2 times a day. They say that actually the biggest meal should be when the sun is at its peak, that is lunch. So that is the biggest meal of the day. And once the sun sets, as much as possible, you should not eat, because the body's metabolism also is sort of going down in preparation for sleep. So no matter how many BPOs come, you can't really change the human circadian rhythm in one generation. It's simply not possible. So when we try to do it, we run into a lot of these problems. So yoga is just one way of like systematizing all these things. It's not that yoga talks about intermittent fasting, but yoga will talk about moderation in diet, mitahara. And so in Ayurveda also, yoga comes in that ahara and vihara. Yoga is a very important part of Ayurveda also. So this is some of the questions. I don't know, do we have 5 minutes? Any more questions?
There is a request to repeat the name of the book.
Flow. I think it's there in my slide. I'll show you a photo of the book itself. There are 2 books he has written. Where is that? Yeah. So the one on the left side, the green one, is more for the layman. All of us can understand. This talks about what is flow, how flow can be achieved, what it means in everyday life. Whereas the book on the right side, the blue one, is more for people who seriously want to work in the area of positive psychology. And here he has described all his work and the tools that he has used. It's a good book, but not for the layman, because it would become quite boring. The one on the left is for everybody. Wonderful book. Of course, I read both of these and then summarize some of this for you. But I would suggest to start with the green one, and then if you're really interested, you can go on to the other one. The blue one is also very expensive. So the green one is not. So that's another reason to start with the green one. So I hope you all had a very interesting session. And I can see that there are so many chats, but unfortunately, in the interest of time, I don't think I'll be able to answer all of these questions immediately. Please read this book. And if, of course, yoga, I'm sure you have got many other references also. But again, a simple book to start is the best, I think, is the B.K. Iyengar, Light on Yoga. That's the best book to start if you really want to understand what Patanjali talks about. And there is also, of course, another book called The Light on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, again written by B.K.S. Iyengar ji. But Light on Yoga is what I would recommend. Flow is something that I can recommend even for people who are not so much interested in yoga.